The man my son called Dad on that flight to Scottsdale was supposed to be at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. For 2 years, that's where I pictured him. Not in some gruesome way, but in a quiet, final sense. A place of rest. But there he was, sitting in seat 14B, trying to hide behind a pair of cheap glasses and a terrible blonde dye job. Before that moment, I was Juliana Beaumont, the woman who had her life together. The successful San Francisco surgeon, The Rock, the admirable widow who was finally taking her 7-year-old son Lucas on their first real vacation since the accident. The air in the cabin was stuffy, smelling of disinfectant and coffee. I remember the feeling of the seatbelt clicking into place, a small, satisfying sound that felt like the start of something new. I was finally moving forward. I squeezed Lucas's hand, and he smiled up at me, his eyes full of the same hope I felt. Then he pointed. A small, chubby finger extended across the aisle, and he shouted it, with the kind of pure, uncomplicated joy only a child has. "It's Dad!" My heart didn't just stop. It felt like it was ripped out of my chest. The hum of the engines, the chatter of the passengers, it all faded into a deafening roar in my ears. I looked, and I saw a ghost. It was him. Thinner, yes, was a mess, but it was the way he held his jaw, the curve of his ear, the shape of his hands resting on the armrest. It was Marcus. He heard Lucas's voice. I saw his body go rigid. His eyes darted toward us, wide with panic, before he quickly turned to stare out the window, flicker of recognition, that pure terror on his face. It was all the confirmation I needed. The official story, the yacht, the storm, the body never recovered, was a lie. The whole world had mourned, and it was all a lie. I thought that seeing him was the ultimate betrayal. I had no idea it was just the first crack in a foundation made of secrets and deceit. This story, it's not just about a man who faked his death. It's about how deep the lies went, and who else was whispering them in my ear all along. I'm going to lay it all out, piece by painful piece. If you want to be here to see the whole truth come out, make sure you stick around for the next chapter. You won't believe what happened when we landed. The rest of that flight was the longest 90 minutes of my life. Every breath I took felt like I was stealing his air. I couldn't look at him, but I could feel him. A few rows ahead, a black hole pulling all the light and air out of the cabin. My job was to protect Lucas. I had to smile, to distract him with cartoons on the in-flight screen, all while a silent scream was clawing its way up my throat. My mind was racing, trying to find a rational explanation. A doppelganger, a long-lost twin he never knew he had, but I knew. The terror in his eyes when he saw me, that was real. As soon as we landed, a new kind of panic set in. I had to keep him in my sights. He was one of the first people off the plane, practically running. I grabbed our carry-ons, my hand clamped firmly on Lucas's shoulder, and whispered that we were going to play a game. A spy game. Lucas, bless his innocent heart, was thrilled. "Who are we following, Mommy?" he whispered, his eyes wide with excitement. I just said, "A man in a hurry," and my voice sounded hollow even to me. He got into a taxi. I bundled Lucas into the first available rental car I could find, a generic tan sedan, and just told the agent to charge whatever she had to for the fastest checkout. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely sign the paperwork. "Follow that cab," I said to myself, the words tasting like something from a bad movie. But this was my life. The Scottsdale sun was blinding, a world away from the cool fog of San Francisco. It felt harsh, exposing. He led me to a sprawling, terracotta-roofed luxury condo complex, the kind with manicured lawns and a security gate that slid open silently. He disappeared inside. I parked across the street, my heart pounding against my ribs. This wasn't the hideout of a man on the run. This was the home of a man who had already won. I drove until I found a Starbucks, the picture of suburban normalcy. Lucas was happy with a juice box and my phone. I went to the restroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at the stranger in the mirror. Then I made the call. Olivia, my best friend since med school and the sharpest lawyer I know, answered on the second ring. "Jules, how's the sun? Are you sipping a margarita yet?" Her voice was so full of life, so normal it almost broke me. I started to cry, a choked, ugly sound. I told her everything, the words tumbling out in a rush. The plane, Lucas's shout, the dye job, the condo. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her processing. the lawyer and her fighting with the friend. I'm sure she thought I was having a breakdown, that 2 years of grief had finally fractured my sanity. She gently suggested maybe the stress had gotten to me, but I held my ground. I know what I saw, Lee. It was him. Another pause. Then her voice changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by steel. Okay, she said, her tone clipped and professional. Okay, Juliana, stay put. Don't approach him. Don't do anything. I know a guy in Phoenix, a private investigator. His name is Pierce. I'm hiring him for you right now. Just be a mom. Take Lucas to the hotel. I'll call you the second I hear anything. The next 48 hours were a blur of hotel pools and room service, me pretending everything was fine for Lucas while I jumped every time my phone buzzed. The call came on the second night. I put Lucas to bed and stepped out onto the balcony, the desert air cool against my skin. Olivia didn't waste time with pleasantries. Pierce found him, she said, her voice tight. The condo is leased under the name Ethan Grant. My breath hitched. Who is Ethan Grant? He is, Olivia said softly. It's his new name. Pierce ran the plates on a car registered to him. Pulled his credit history. It's a whole new identity, Jules. Clean as a whistle. I felt sick. There's more, isn't there? Yes. She took a deep breath. Ethan Grant is engaged to a woman named Sophia Reyes. Her father is a real estate mogul in Scottsdale. The wedding is in 3 months. I leaned against the railing, the world tilting under my feet. Engaged. A new name, a new life built on top of the ruins of ours. All my desperate, insane hopes for a reasonable explanation vanished. This wasn't a man suffering from amnesia. This wasn't a tragic misunderstanding. This was This was cruel. The man I loved, the man I mourned, hadn't just disappeared. He had meticulously, purposefully erased us. My grief, my widowhood, my strength, it had all been part of his plan. The love I thought we had, it was just the setup for the greatest con of my life. That was the moment I stopped being his victim. That was the moment I realized the man I was married to never really existed. After that phone call with Olivia, something inside me felt distant. They were luxuries I could no longer afford. The woman who cried on the balcony was gone, and in her place was a surgeon. I spent my days dissecting human bodies, finding the sickness and cutting it out. I decided to handle my husband the same way. Mr. Pierce was doing his job, building a file on the life of Ethan Grant. But I knew the real answers. The ones that would show me how this happened weren't in Scottsdale. They were buried back in San Francisco, hidden in the digital life of Marcus Beaumont. I was the only one with the keys to that kingdom. I just had to find the right door. I called my hospital and fabricated a story about a family crisis that required me to be away indefinitely. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. Then, I sat Lucas down and told him we were going on a secret mission, and that for a while, our hotel room was going to be Mommy's office. I bought him a new set of Legos, put on his favorite movie, and opened my laptop. The hunt began. For 3 days, I barely slept. I waded through the swamp of our shared digital life, and every file was a landmine. I opened our cloud drive and was greeted by a picture of us, smiling on a beach in Hawaii 5 years ago. My first instinct was to slam the laptop shut. Planning this even then? Was that smile a lie? I had to force myself to push past the memories, to see everything as potential evidence. I scoured old bank statements, tax returns, photo archives, looking for anything out of the ordinary. Nothing. It was all perfectly normal, perfectly boring. He was meticulous, I'll give him that. He had scrubbed his life. On the 4th night, around 3 a.m., I was ready to give up. Lucas was sleeping soundly, a little half smile on his face. I looked at him, so innocent, and a fresh wave of cold fury washed over me. Marcus didn't just betray. He abandoned him. He let his own child believe he was dead. That thought lit a fire in. I wouldn't give up. I started thinking not like a grieving wife, but like him. Marcus was brilliant, but he was also arrogant. He believed he was the smartest person in any. He wouldn't have just deleted everything. That wasn't his style. He would have hidden it, savoring the secret. He loved trophies. He would have kept a trophy of his greatest con. And then it hit me, a memory so mundane I'd almost forgotten it. Years ago, he'd set up a secure digital vault for us, a place to store copies of our passports, Lucas's birth certificate, the deed to our house, the boring, essential paperwork of life. He'd called it the Beaumont Legacy. He was always so dramatic about things like that. I hadn't thought about it since he died. I found the login page. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The password. It had to be something sentimental, something he'd think I'd never guess he would still use. His arrogance was his weakness. I typed in the date of our first dinner, a night I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times over the last 2 years, as the perfect magical beginning. Access grant. My breath caught in my throat. Inside, it looked exactly as I remember. Folders for financials, legal, Lucas. But there was one I didn't recognize, a folder tucked at the bottom named Admin. My cursor trembled as I clicked it. Inside, a single subfolder. Its name was The Lighthouse Project. I opened it, and there it was. Not emails, not bank transfers. Something far more chilling. It was a scanned copy of his $10 million life insurance policy, the one the company had paid out to me. But this copy was covered in his familiar, sharp handwriting. There were dates circled in red, complex calculations in the margins, and a list of offshore bank names. And next to the final payout amount, the $10 million that had secured my future, he'd written 2 words. A note to himself. Seed capital. I felt my lungs. My entire world narrowed to those 2 words. Seed capital. It wasn't a safety net for his grieving family. It was a business investment. Pain, Lucas's trauma, the funeral where I wept over an empty casket. It was all just a transaction. He hadn't just left me. He had liquidated seed capital. 2 words. I sent a screenshot to Olivia with no other explanation. It was all she needed. It felt like launching a torpedo into the dark, aimed at a life I used to have. The friend in her was horrified. The lawyer in her was energized. She told me to sit tight. Mr. Pierce now had a new directive. Don't just watch Ethan Grant. Find the trail of Marcus Beaumont. Find the money. So, I waited. And I perfected the art of the lie. My days in Scottsdale took on a surreal split-screen quality. On the surface, I was the perfect single mom on an extended vacation. I took Lucas to the zoo, to the splash pad at our hotel. I helped him build elaborate Lego castles on the floor of our room. I smiled until my face ached. But the second he was asleep, I was back on my laptop, my world shrinking to the blue glow of the screen. I'd pore over the documents from our digital vault, cross-referencing names and dates, building a timeline of my own destruction. Every photo of us together was no longer a memory, but a piece of evidence in an investigation where I was the sole victim. The call from Olivia came a week later. It was late. Lucas was fast asleep, one arm thrown over a stuffed dinosaur. I saw her name on the screen, and I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. I stepped out onto the balcony. "He hollowed you out, Jules," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. It was the voice she used when the facts were too brutal for Pierce followed the breadcrumbs from that document. For a year before he died, Marcus was systematically draining your joint accounts. Mortgages, lines of credit you never knew you had. He forged your signature on at least a dozen documents. It's not just the $10 million from the insurance. He took everything. Over $25 million, all funneled through shell corporations to an account in the Cayman Islands. I sagged against the railing. My legs suddenly, $25 million, a number so large it was meaningless. He hadn't just stolen our future, he'd stolen our past, everything we had ever built. But Olivia wasn't finished. "That's not the worst part," she said, and I braced myself. Pierce couldn't figure out one piece of the puzzle, the death certificate. It was official, ironclad. There was no way a man like Marcus could get that on his own. He had to have help. So Pierce dug into his encrypted communications for the 6 weeks leading up to the boating trip. I waited, the silence stretching. I thought of shady business partners, a disgruntled employee, some faceless criminal. I never in a million years expected the name she said next. It was Beatrice Juliana. The world stopped. Beatrice, his mother, my mother-in-law, the woman who clutched my hand at her own face a mask of inconsolable grief, the woman who called me every Sunday for 2 years to see how her brave, strong daughter was doing. She planned it with him, Olivia continued, her voice gentle. Pierce has the emails. They talked about it like they were planning a surprise party. She was the one who procured the death certificate, an old family friend in a coroner's office. She was the one who coached him on how to act, who packed his go bag. Pierce found one email that, "I'm so sorry, Jules." One where he asked if you'd be okay. Beatrice wrote back, and I'm quoting, "Juliana is a survivor. She'll grieve, but she'll be fine. That's what the money is for, after all. That's what the money is for." I hung up the phone. I didn't cry. The capacity for tears had been burned out of me. I thought back to Beatrice holding me, whispering in my ear that I was the strongest woman she knew. She wasn't comforting me. She was admiring her own handiwork. She wasn't my fellow mourner. She was my husband's ghostwriter, the author of my pain. That night, something inside me broke for the last, but in its place, something new and hard and cold began to form. They hadn't just made me a widow. They had made me a weapon, and I was finally ready to be aimed. The rage I felt was a fire, but a fire in the open is wild and destructive. I needed a furnace, something that could contain that heat and focus it into a single white-hot point. My grief had been my costume for 2 years. Now, I needed a new one. With Olivia's help, I created it. Dr. Juliana Beaumont, a leading pediatric surgeon from San Francisco, was taking a sabbatical. She was exploring the possibility of opening a new, exclusive clinic in Scottsdale, a place for the ultra-wealthy to ensure their children received the best possible care. It was a perfect cover story, plausible, impressive, and designed to put me directly in the path of people like the Reyes family. It gave me a reason to be at the charity galas, the country clubs, and the private fundraisers where Sophia Reyes and her real estate mogul father were fixtures. My first move was to join the country club where Sophia played tennis 3 times a week. I spent a week observing her, learning her routines, her friends, her brand of bottled water. Then I made my approach. A simple, accidental mix-up of our identical water bottles at the Clubhouse Cafe. It was laughably simple. I introduced myself, and we fell into easy conversation. I was charming, witty, and I listened. People like Sophia aren't used to being listened to. They're used to being watched. Within a day, we were having lunch. A week later, she invited me to a small cocktail party at her family's estate. "You have to meet my fiancé, Ethan," she'd said, her eyes sparkling. "You'll love him." The moment I saw him, standing by a massive stone fireplace, laughing with Sophia's father, I felt a tremor of pure hatred. He looked happy, healthy. He wore an expensive suit like a second skin. This was the man he was always meant to be, and all it cost was my entire world. Sophia led me over. "Ethan, darling, this is Juliana, the surgeon I told you about." He turned, a polite smile on his face. He took my hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Juliana." His hand was warm, his grip firm. His eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me with adoration across 1,000 dinner tables, held nothing, not a flicker of recognition. To him, I was just another wealthy, a potential contact in his new, gilded life. Shaking the hand of the man I'd mourned was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I smiled back, my mask held perfectly in place. "The pleasure is all mine," but the real test came an hour later. An older woman, impeccably dressed and dripping with diamonds, joined our circle. It was Beatrice. She looked at me, then did a double take, her eyes widening in what looked like shock, before she quickly composed herself. She thought she was seeing a ghost. I gave her a small, polite smile, the smile of a stranger, and the tension in her shoulders visibly eased. She believed she was safe. We made small talk. I mentioned I was a widow. Beatrice's eyes lit up with a sick, predatory sympathy. She placed a cool, dry hand on my arm. "Poor, dear thing," she cooed, her voice dripping with the same fake compassion she'd used on me for 2 years. "I know that pain. I lost my own son. It's a wound that never truly heals." I held her gaze. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Sophia looked at Marcus, at Ethan, and said, "Can you imagine? It's just so awful." And that's when he made his mistake. Marcus, full of confidence, puffed out his chest and put his arm around Sophia. He looked at me with an air of philosophical superiority. "Tragic," he agreed, "but business and life are about managing assets. Sometimes a clean exit is the only way to protect the bottom line. You have to be willing to cut your losses and walk away. No loose ends. It's the only way to guarantee a fresh start." The room fell silent for a beat, an awkward response to a widow's story. Sophia just squeezed his hand, looking at him with adoration for his strength. Beatrice nodded in agreement. None of them heard it. But I did. Loose ends. Cut your losses. The bottom line. He wasn't talking about business. He was talking about me. About Lucas. He was giving me the mission statement for his entire crime, gift-wrapped in corporate jargon and arrogance. He wasn't a man who had faked his death. He was a CEO who had liquidated a failed subsidiary. And in that moment, he didn't just confirm his guilt. He handed me the exact weapon I needed to bring him down. He had just taught me his language, and I was about to become very, very fluent. Loose ends. Cut your losses. After that night at the Reyes estate, those words, he'd spoken of our life's destruction in the language of a quarterly report. I was no longer hunting the ghost of a husband. I was analyzing a hostile takeover. And I knew my next move wasn't about finding more evidence of what he did. It was about understanding, in cold, hard terms, why. Greed was a part of it, yes. But his little speech revealed something deeper. A desperate, almost pathological need for a clean exit. What was he so desperate to run from? I called Olivia. I didn't tell her about my infiltration into Sophia's life. That was a risk I needed to own myself, but I told her about his words. He's a risk man. His crime was a business strategy. We're missing the motive. What was the liability he was trying to shed? That single question sent Olivia and her PI on a new path. They stopped digging into the shiny, perfect life of Ethan Grant and started excavating the financial crypt of Marcus Beaumont. For 2 weeks, I continued my charade. I had brunch with Sophia. I played tennis at the club. I even had a second, horrifyingly pleasant conversation with Beatrice, who was still in town. I listened to her talk about her late, brilliant son, all while smiling and nodding. Every interaction was a piece of reconnaissance, every polite question a probe for weaknesses. The breakthrough came from a place I never expected. Mr. Pierce found a record of Marcus being served legal papers 3 months before his death. The lawsuit was quietly settled and sealed out of court. But Pierce, with his particular set of skills, managed to unseal it. It wasn't from a bank. It was from a private equity fund I'd never heard of. A firm with a reputation for being ruthless. Marcus owed them $12 million. But it was the source of the debt that made my blood run cold. It wasn't from a bad stock trade or a failed business venture. The premise mentioned gambling, but the truth was so much worse. Pierce's research showed that Marcus had been secretly funneling our money into a high-stakes, unregulated poker game. A game run by this private equity fund where CEOs and tech barons would gamble away fortunes in a single night. He wasn't just a gambler. He was an addict, and he had lost everything. The emails between him and Beatrice from that time told the real story. He was terrified. The people he owed money to didn't just sue, they destroyed careers, families, lives. In one frantic message, he told his mother they had threatened to expose him, to ruin his reputation and come after our assets. They were going to take our house, our savings, everything. And then I saw it. Beatrice's reply, so calm and it was chill. Can't let them, my love, she wrote. A ship that is sinking must be abandoned. There is a way to save yourself. The insurance policy, it's the only asset they can't touch. The puzzle pieces slammed into place with sickening force. He didn't fake his death to get rich. He faked his death to escape a debt that was about to crush him. He wasn't running towards a new life. He was running away from the consequences of his old one. The most horrifying realization was this. His plan wasn't just about saving himself. It was about sacrificing me. If he had simply disappeared, his creditors would have come after our joint estate. They would have come after me. By dying, he legally severed himself from the debt and the danger, leaving his grieving widow and child to face the wolves alone. The insurance money wasn't his nest egg. It was the prize he snatched before the entire ship went down, leaving his family to drown. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For so long, I had been trying to understand the monster, but he wasn't a monster. Monsters are strong. Marcus was a coward, a terrified little boy who was so afraid of being exposed as a failure that he burned down his own family to cover his tracks. And in that moment, I knew how I would destroy. It wouldn't be about the money, it would be about I would strip away the facade of the brilliant banker and the suave Ethan Grant and show the world, especially his new family, the pathetic, frightened man hiding underneath. There's nothing a coward fears more than the light, and I was going to become a supernova. Knowing Marcus was a coward was one thing. Proving it to the world was another. My evidence was strong, but it was all digital. Emails, bank transfers, hidden files. A clever lawyer could try to paint me as a scorned, hysterical woman, a genius hacker forging evidence. Marcus and Beatrice would deny everything, hiding behind their wall of money and influence. I needed something human, something undeniable. I needed an accomplice to flip. I went back to the emails between Marcus and Beatrice. the one where she mentioned procuring the death certificate. She named him. A dear old family friend at the county records office. A man named Arthur Abernathy. That was my target. He was the weak link, the one person outside their corrupt little family of two who knew the truth. I tasked Mr. Pierce with a new mission: find everything on Arthur Abernathy. I wanted to know what he ate for breakfast, where he got his coffee, and most importantly, what kept him up at night. The file Pierce sent back a few days later was both pathetic and perfect. Abernathy was a widower on the verge of retirement. His pension was meager, and he was drowning in debt from his late wife's cancer treatments. His one pride and joy, the center of his entire world, was his 17-year-old granddaughter, a brilliant student who dreamed of going to Stanford. Beatrice hadn't bribed him with a briefcase of cash. She had preyed on his desperation, offering to pay off his medical debts in exchange for his services, framing it as repayment for some long-forgotten favor the Beaumont family had done for him years ago. He wasn't a master criminal. He was a good man who had made a terrible choice for what he thought were the right reasons. I knew then that I couldn't break him with threats. I had to offer him a lifeline. I booked a flight to San Francisco, telling Sophia I had to deal with some lingering estate issues. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I arranged to meet Arthur Abernathy at a small cafe overlooking Golden Gate Park. He was a small, nervous man with watery eyes and hands that wouldn't stop fidgeting with a sugar packet. He thought I was there to blackmail him. I let him sweat for a moment before I spoke. "I'm not here to ruin you, Arthur," I said, my voice low and calm. "I'm here to offer you a way out." I laid it all out. I told him I knew about the debt, about Beatrice's offer. I showed him a printed copy of the email where I saw the color drain from his face. "When this comes out, and it will come out, they will throw you to the wolves to save themselves. You will lose you will face and your granddaughter's name will be forever linked to a federal fraud case." He started to stammer, to deny it, but his eyes told the truth. "I have a different offer," I said, leaning forward. "Olivia has prepared an affidavit. It details your involvement, every step. You sign it, you agree to testify, and we will offer it as part of a cooperation deal with the district attorney. They will grant you immunity or, at worst, a lenient sentence." He stared at me, his mind racing. I could see the conflict, the fear. Then I played my final card. "And to compensate you for your cooperation," I said, sliding a second document across the table, "I will personally pay off every cent of your late wife's medical debt, and I will establish a trust that will cover the full 4-year tuition for your granddaughter, at any university she chooses, Stanford, Harvard, Yale. It's her choice." He looked at the document, then back at me, his eyes filling with tears. "Why would you do this?" he whispered. "Because the money I'm using," I said, my voice turning to ice, "is the money they stole from me. I can think of no better use for it than to buy back the truth." He broke. The whole story came pouring out. The pressure from Beatrice, the shame, the fear. He signed the affidavit right there. As I walked out of that cafe, the signed, notarized confession felt heavier than a brick in my purse. It was the cornerstone of my revenge. Marcus and Beatrice thought their secret was safe, held by the loyalty they had bought with dirty money. They never considered that their greatest liability was about to become my single greatest asset. I returned to Scottsdale a different woman. The Abernathy affidavit was locked in my hotel room safe, a coiled snake waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The question was no longer if I would take them down, but how. I wanted more than just justice. I wanted a reckoning. A private confrontation would be unsatisfying. A courtroom battle would be long and clinical. I needed to destroy Marcus's new life in the same way he had destroyed mine, publicly, spectacularly, and without mercy. I had to pull the mask off his face in front of everyone he was trying to become. To do that, I had to get closer to Sophia than ever before. I became her shadow, her new best friend. It was a nauseating, soul-crushing performance. I listened to her gush about wedding venues and flower arrangements. I offered advice on seating charts. I had to sit there smiling while she described the deep, soulful man Ethan was, how he'd been so hurt in a past business partnership and was finally learning to trust again. The lies were so thick I felt like I was choking on them. But with every lie she told me, a lie he had undoubtedly fed her, my resolve hardened. The opportunity I was waiting for fell into my lap during a ridiculously expensive lunch. Sophia was buzzing with excitement. Her family's foundation was hosting its annual masterpiece, the Starlight Charity Gala, in 3 weeks. It was the premier social event in Scottsdale. And the best news, she squealed, clapping her hands. Daddy just invited Ethan to join the foundation's board. The gala will be his first official event. He's even going to give a little speech. My heart hammered against my ribs, a slow, heavy drumbeat. That was it. The perfect stage. A ballroom full of the wealthiest, most influential people in Arizona. A night dedicated to charity and good reputations. And Marcus, Ethan, at the podium, presenting himself as a pillar of integrity. It was so beautifully, poetically, I almost laughed. That afternoon, I made a call to my financial advisor. I instructed him to make a donation to the Reyes Family Foundation in the name of a private trust Olivia had set up. The amount was significant, large enough to be noticed, but anonymous enough to be intriguing. The next day, I had coffee with Sophia's mother, a woman who prided herself on her family's philanthropy. I told her how moved I was by their work. I told her that, as a surgeon and a widow, I had come to understand the importance of legacy. Then I made my pitch. I know this is unorthodox, I said, my voice carefully measured, full of feigned humility. But I would be so honored if I could say a few words at the gala. Just a minute or two. To speak about what it means to turn grief into grace. To honor the memory of a loved one, my late husband, by giving back. She was completely captivated. A beautiful, tragic surgeon widow sharing her story of resilience. It was a fundraiser's dream. She not only agreed, she insisted. She decided I would speak right before the new board member, Ethan Grant, was introduced. I would set the emotional, philanthropic tone for the evening. She had just handed me the microphone. The final pieces snapped into place. I called Olivia. "It's time," I said. "Book your flight." I told her the date of the gala, the venue, the plan. She would be there, with 2 sets of everything. One for the police, whom she would have waiting discreetly outside the hotel ballroom, and one for... That evening, the official invitation arrived at my hotel room. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock with embossed gold lettering. An evening of starlight. To the 500 other guests, it was a ticket to a party. For me, it was a summons. It was the confirmation that all the players were now in position. The trap was set, the bait was taken. All that was left was for the guest of honor to walk on stage and face the execution. The day of the gala arrived with a almost surreal calm. The air in my hotel suite was still, but for me, it felt like the charged silence before a lightning strike. Olivia arrived that morning, a black briefcase in her hand, her expression all business. She was my general, my second in command. We spent an hour going over the plan one last time. The packets of evidence, the sworn affidavit, the discreet call she would make to the lead detective, who would be waiting with his team in the hotel's security office. Everything was in place. For the rest of the day, I was alone. I needed to be. I ordered room service, took a long bath, and methodically prepared myself for the night. It felt like preparing for a complex surgery. There was no room for error, no space for doubt. My hands had to be steady. My voice could not break. My dress was laid out on the bed. It wasn't black. I would never wear black for him again. It was a deep, blood red, a column of silk that was both elegant and severe. It was a declaration. The woman who had mourned Marcus Beaumont was gone. The woman who would unmask Ethan Grant was my armor. That afternoon, Sophia called, bubbling with excitement, and asked me to come down to the ballroom for a final walk. My heart leapt into my throat. It was a risk, but one I had to. When I arrived, Sophia was directing florists, and standing in the center of the room, looking impossibly smug, were Marcus and Beatrice. They were arguing. It was quiet, a vicious little spat under the guise of a normal conversation. I stayed back, pretending to admire the flower arrangements, and I listened. "I just think it's too soon for you to be taking such a public role," Beatrice was murmuring. A strained smile plastered on her face. "You need to keep a lower profile," Marcus scoffed, adjusting the knot on his tuxedo. "Nonsense. This is exactly what we planned. Integration, stability. Sophia's father trusts me. This is the final step. You should be happy." "Am happy," she hissed, her eyes darting around the room. "I'm just cautious. We can't afford any mistakes." He looked down at her, a flicker of something ugly and dismissive in his eyes. "There won't be any mistakes, Mother. I have everything under control. You did your part. Now it's time for me to secure my future. Our future." But I heard the unspoken words between. He was already moving on. He was cementing his place with the Reyes family, a dynasty far more powerful than the Beaumont name he'd thrown away. Beatrice, his co-conspirator, the architect of his escape, was becoming a relic of a past he wanted to forget. She wasn't worried about being caught. She was terrified of being replaced. Their alliance, forged in lies, was rotting from the inside with resentment and fear. They weren't a team. They were just two rats who had promised not to eat each other until they got to the other side. That was the last bit of strength I needed. They were already broken. I just had to show the cracks to the world. I spent the final hour before the gala in my room. When the hair and makeup artist was done, I sent her away and stood before the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at me was her eyes were clear and her mouth set in a line. It was all gone, burned away in the furnace of my room. Before I left, I walked into the adjoining room where Lucas was sleeping. A babysitter Olivia had personally vetted watching a movie quietly. I leaned down in the sweet, innocent scent. He was the only thing that was real. He was the reason for all of this. He deserved a life free of the shadow of his father's lies. I took one last look in the mirror, smoothing the red silk of my dress. The widow was a ghost. The victim was a memory. All that was left was a surgeon, scalpel in hand, ready to make the first deep cut. The time for waiting was over. The show was about to begin. I walked into the Starlight Gala, and the world seemed to move in slow motion. The air was thick with expensive perfume, the murmur of powerful people, the clink of crystal glasses. It was a perfect illusion of civility and grace, a beautiful lie. I found my table near the front, my hands resting calmly in my lap. Across the room, I saw him. Marcus was holding court, laughing with Sophia's father, perfectly at ease. He was the king of his stolen castle. He caught my eye for a second and gave me a polite, dismissive nod. The nod you give a stranger. A loose end. Olivia was at a table in the back, a specter of justice in a black evening gown. I gave her the slightest dip of my chin. She nodded back, her eyes hard as diamonds, and discreetly touched her phone. The call was made. The pieces were moving. An hour later, after a forgettable dinner and two equally forgettable speeches, Sophia's mother walked to the podium. Her voice was warm as she introduced me. And now, to share a moving story about turning tragedy into hope, I am honored to present Dr. Juliana Beaumont. The spotlight found. I stood up, the red of my dress feeling like a flame in the dim light. I walked to the stage, my heels clicking softly on the marble. I adjusted the microphone, my hands perfectly steady. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces, and then my eyes found his. He was smiling, ready to be moved by the tragic widow's tale before his own grand debut. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and amplified, filling every corner of the vast ballroom. "My name is Dr. Juliana Beaumont. 2 years ago, my husband, Marcus, died in what I was told was a tragic boating." I paused, letting the familiar narrative settle in. I saw the nods of sympathy. "I'm here to talk about legacies, about the stories we used." Murmur rippled through the audience. I had their attention. "My husband taught me about business," my voice gaining a sharp, metallic. "He taught me that to succeed, you have to be willing to cut your losses, to ensure a clean exit with no loose ends." I saw his smile falter. The blood was draining from his face. Beatrice, sitting beside him, looked like she had turned to stone. "I'd like to honor my husband's legacy tonight," I said. And behind me, its screen that had been showing the Foundation's logo flickered to life. A happy, smiling photo of Marcus filled the screen. My Marcus, the man from our wedding. This was Marcus Beaumont. A collective gasp went through the room. People turned, staring at the man they knew as Ethan Grant, a man so dedicated to a clean exit that he faked his own death, I declared, my voice rising. The screen changed. A bank statement from the Cayman Islands showing a balance of over $25 million. "He stole our life savings." The screen flashed again, this time to a copy of the encrypted email from Beatrice. The sentence was highlighted in red. "She'll be fine. That's what the money is for after all." He conspired with his own mother, Beatrice Beaumont, sitting right there, to abandon his 7-year-old son and leave me to a pack of wolves he called his creditors. Sophia was staring at him, her face a mask of horror, and her father looked like he was going to be sick. "But a crime this perfect needed help," I said, my eyes locked on Marcus. It needed a fraudulent death certificate. A photo of Arthur Abernathy appeared on the screen, followed by a high-resolution image of his signed, sworn affidavit. And this is the man who provided it. A man who has already confessed everything to the authorities in exchange for their protection from the people he helped. That was the trump card, the one piece he could never have. His face, which had been a mask of shock, crumbled into pure animal terror. I let the silence hang for thick. Then I delivered the final lines. The Reyes Foundation is a fine institution, and I am honored to be a donor. But I feel it is my duty to warn you about the man you've just invited to your board. He is not Ethan Grant, the philanthropist. He is Marcus Beaumont, a thief, a liar, and a coward who is sitting right there. I pointed my finger directly at his table. 500 pairs of eyes followed my gesture. The cameras hired to film the party all swiveled and zoomed in on his face, trapping him in a circle of light. The silence in the room was absolute, a crushing weight of shock and judgment. And then, from the back of the ballroom, the grand double doors swung open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, followed by 2 detectives. They paused for a moment, their presence sucking all the air out of the room. The spell of the silence was finally broken by a sickeningly soft thud. Sophia had fainted, sliding from her chair onto the floor in a heap of designer silk. Marcus and Beatrice were frozen, trapped between the spotlight, the police, and the utter ruin of the world they had built. There was nowhere left to run. From my place on the stage, I had a perfect view of the beautiful lie shattering into a million pieces. The ballroom, moments before a picture of decorum, erupted into chaos. Not loud, shouting chaos, but a frantic, whispering kind, the kind where reputations die. Phones were out, recording. The Reyes family, their faces masks of fury and humiliation, formed a protective wall around the unconscious Sophia. But my eyes were on Marcus and Beatrice. I watched the police officers approach their table. There was no struggle, no denial. There was nothing left to say. Marcus just stared at me, his face hollowed out by the sudden, violent arrival of a reality he had spent 2 years running from. The smug, confident Ethan Grant was gone. All that was left was the man from the plane, the terrified man in seat 14. I saw the officer speak, and I saw Marcus and Beatrice rise like zombies from their chairs. The sound of the first handcuff clicking onto his wrist was barely audible, but in the silent theater of my mind, it was as loud as a thunderclap. It was the sound of a chapter ending. My chapter as a victim. The legal battle that followed was, in comparison, anticlimax. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the financial trail, and the sworn testimony of a repentant Arthur Abernathy, they had no defense. They both took plea deals. Marcus was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. Beatrice, for her role as the architect, received 7. Olivia, in her infinite brilliance, worked with the prosecutors to have all the stolen assets seized and returned. Every last dollar Marcus had funneled into his fantasy life came back. On paper, I had won. I had gotten everything back. But for a long time after, I felt a strange emptiness. The rage that had for months, that had given me a singus, was gone, and in its place was a quiet, unsettling. I had to face the woman in the mirror, not the warrior in the red dress, but the woman who had loved. The hardest part of the entire ordeal wasn't the revenge, forgiving myself for not trusting so blindly, for believing in a fairy tale that had been a carefully scripted horror story all along. I had to accept flexion of your weakness, but of their and I won it not in a ballroom, quiet heart. The house in San Francisco wasn't, it was a crime scene, a museum of a life that wasn't real. I sold it and everything in it. I packed up only what mattered. My son, our photos, we moved to Seattle. People asked me why, away from the sun. But the rain here feels different. It feels cleansing, like it's washing the world clean, making everything new and our home now is smaller, warmer. It's filled with light and Lucas's laughter, which is the only sound that has ever mattered. Sometimes I stand at my kitchen window, a cup of coffee in my hands, and I watch him playing in the yard, so full of life and untroubled by the ghosts of the past. He was the one thing Marcus couldn't steal. He is my true legacy. I'm a surgeon. I'm a mother. I'm a woman who, for the first time in a long time, gets to write the next page of her own story with no co-author. I finally have a clean exit and a fresh start. My story found its resolution here, in a city of rain and rebirth. But I know these stories, in their own ways, are happening everywhere, in big cities and small towns, whispered in quiet rooms. So many of us are fighting battles no one else can see. It's a comforting thought. knowing we're not alone in our strength. I'd love to know where you are listening to this from. Tell me what city you're in down in the comments. It's a good reminder that we're all connected, all over finding our own new dawn.